Geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comic fans all over the world, bonjour, guten tag, hola, to everyone who is showing up here, and a little mushy mushy to our Japanese fans. This is Chuck Dixon here to answer your questions about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. And you've got some great questions. You've always got some great questions. I love this community. I love how it's growing. And you can help it grow by hitting that old subscribe button. If you're new to this program or you've been watching it now for a couple of years and haven't subscribed, it doesn't cost a dime. Just asking you to hit that button and subscribe. A lot of you, and you have my eternal gratitude, a lot of you have done so. And the channel's grown quite a bit just in the last few weeks. We got a lot more viewers, a lot more subscribers. And that's the way I like it. If you want to go a little further, you can go to Subscribestar and join my $5 or $1 a month program. There are rewards, there are goodies for being a member there. Okay, first question, David Jordan. Was there any influence of Daredevil and Nightwing when you were writing the character? They've always felt similar in my mind, the way they move and fight and the two sticks they use as weapons. No, not really. Not really, because as I've said in previous videos, I'm not a big Daredevil fan. I mean, I read a lot of Daredevil when I was a kid, and I liked the stories that I read, but I wasn't a big fan of the character, especially over time as they made him more of a guilt-ridden Catholic, which I can relate to. But it just didn't have a lot of appeal. There's not a lot of laughs there. And the thing about Dick Grayson is he's pretty comfortable in his own skin. He's not in any way guilt-ridden. He's a pretty well-adjusted character given, despite his past, as being a boy hostage. And I just wrote him as a guy who kind of liked what he was doing, trying to make a name for himself. Yeah, there's similarities in the fact that Daredevil and Nightwing are not super powered beyond Daredevil's enhanced senses. They aren't super powered guys. They're not super strong. They can't fly and all the rest of it. So yeah, there's definitely similarities, and they're also very much urban type characters, urban crime fighters. But there the similarities end. So no, I don't think Daredevil was a big influence on my interpretation, despite the fact that Scott McDaniel came to Nightwing after quite a long run on Daredevil. John Bua. I am very particular about time travel stories. I have rules for it that if broken, I just reject that story. First, there is only one timeline. That means you cannot change what already happened. Any attempt to change the past will fail. That is the challenge for the writer, in my opinion. What are your rules for time travel? What are your favorite time travel stories? And last, you said your wife can tell when you're writing time travel stories. How so? What are the tells? Well, first of all, the granddaddy of them all, The Time Machine. As far as I know, the first time travel story ever written by H.G. Wells. Loved the movie when I was a kid. Absolutely loved it. Blew my mind. And sought out the novel and read it and loved that even more. So yeah, Time Machine, always a classic, always worth going back to. Another one favorite, Time Bandits. Discussed this recently, answering a question about Terry Gilliam. It's a fun, sort of goofy romp through time. Doesn't really follow any kind of time travel rules that I'm aware of. And delves quite a bit into fantasy, but still a good time travel movie. But the granddaddy of them all, for me, the best one, the Back to the Future movies. I like them because, like you said, time travel stories have to have rules. Not always the same rules, but they have to have rules. And Back to the Future kind of hews to your... not really. It doesn't hew to your version at all, because Marty McFly does change the present by going back to the past. But what I like about these movies is they do create sort of parallel existences, parallel past, parallel futures, that all eventually coalesce and everything corrects itself through the efforts of Marty and Doc Brown. But the greatest thing about these movies is that they deal with all of the paradoxes and the backward and forward motion through time and the effects of going into the past, going into the future, without any plot holes. Bob Zemeckis and Bob Gale, who wrote these movies, they just never dropped a stitch. And I got to meet Bob Gale on a couple of occasions. I got to express this opinion to him. My mad respect for what these guys did in making 3 films that tie together pretty closely. I know the Western one isn't everybody's favorite because it sort of departs from the theme, and yet it still deals with the issues brought up in the first film. And the way the movies keep going back on themselves and relying on the previous events. I mean, it's an excellent it's an excellent trilogy of films. It really, for me, it holds together very well. And of course, they're consistently funny and consistently well acted and well performed. And, compelling characters that we really care about. All these things are important. And Bob Gale told me that they had crew members on the first film who were threatening to quit because they couldn't understand the story. They said, "Didn't we film this before? What does this scene have to do with this other scene?" And they didn't understand at all the story. And movies are usually not filmed in the scenes are not filmed in the order that the film is made, so that makes it even more confusing for the poor crew members, because I think they shot the mall sequence first, the mall parking lot sequence first, if I remember Bob telling me that correctly. Actually, they filmed that after the opening. The opening, like the opening 20 minutes or so of the film were first shot. But Bob said that crew members were out on the mall parking lot at like 3 or 4 in the morning shooting. Crew members were just getting pissed off because they couldn't understand what was going on. I always thought that was funny. Now, as far as rules, I mean, I've written my own time travel stuff. I wrote 6 Bad Times novels. I've touched on time travel a number of times writing comics, but these 6 novels are kind of my time travel epic, telling one big, huge story that literally spans epochs as these U.S. Army Rangers get themselves in more and more trouble by traveling through time through various historical periods and getting into bloody messes. My own rules for this series were that I don't like the butterfly effect. You could not change the future by doing something in the past. You might, within a certain region, you wouldn't affect a global change unless you intended to do so. Unless you, as I showed, and I believe either the 3rd or the 5th novel, the bad guys who are trying to actually manipulate history and do end up creating sort of an evil parallel universe. Their plan is to do away with all world religion because they see all of world religions as an obstacle to their goals of creating a world that they run, under their own iron fist of tyranny. And in the Book of Angels, they set out to kill Christ when he was still like a teenager. And the Rangers go back to rescue him. Now, I'm going to tell you right away, we never see Christ in the novel. We don't know even if they've successfully saved him, or even if they've directly affected the life of Christ at all. But I thought it was such a terrific premise. Plus, I wanted to have them go up against the Roman legion. So these really are an extrapolation of my toy soldier fantasies. And so, yeah, I mean, you could globally affect the present, but it would branch off. Our present would remain the same. Any changes made in the past would create a new alternate dimension. And our characters not only visit different historical eras, they also wind up in some of these really dystopic parallel dimensions. And in one occasion, in the final book in the series, the Pirates of the Cretaceous, one of the characters ends up in an alternate dimension in the past, where they have succeeded in killing Christ and Buddha and several other religious figures, and it's them, marching toward this horrible secular world that is their dream. Anyway, yeah, I have my own rules. Everybody's got their own rules. It's like the rules for vampirism or werewolves or whatever. You got to create your own reality, and you got to create a reality that makes sense to you before you can write this stuff, so it remains consistent and stays with the goal. My own goal, just like Bob Gale, is to not drop a stitch, not have a huge plot hole or inconsistency or imponderable. It doesn't make any sense throughout the series. Now, how my wife tells that I'm writing time travel, I don't know. But she'll say, "Are you writing time travel?" And I'll have to admit I am. She says I act, well, I act bordering on schizo. Really, I think it's a bit of an exaggeration. But she says I will not be able to follow conversations well. I'm not arguing with her. I think she's probably right. Writing time travel takes me to the wrong places in my brain, I think. So perhaps I should seek help. Okay, yeah, all writers should seek help. James HQ. I'm currently reading Punisher World Journal 75. The credits list you and Stephen Grant as co-writers, but man, that comic does not seem like a Chuck Dixon comic. Am I wrong in thinking that you must have been a minor contributor to the issue? I don't mean that as an insult, and hopefully you don't take it as one. No, I'm not insulted. And around the time this comic came out, I see that Don Daly was on the outs and Chris Cooper was coming in. After Bobby Chase became editor-in-chief? Yeah, I think you're right. I don't recall you talking about this in a previous Ask Chuck Dixon episodes. Yeah, I don't remember the history of this. I think Stephen Grant wrote the script, and Don may have had me come in and do some minor rewrites to dialogue, and therefore credited me. I'd have to get the issue out to take a look at it. Yeah, I don't really recall the process here. I do, however, recall the process when Don Daly was fired and Bobby Chase became editor-in-chief at Marvel, and Chris Cooper, thank you for reminding me of his name, was basically given the Punisher to reboot. And I had written all the issues of Warzone, War Journal, and the Punisher book to their conclusion in the Countdown crossover. And, the books were all canceled. They were all canceled the same month. And then they were going to start over again. And I spoke to Chris Cooper, and I said, well, what are your plans for the Punisher? I didn't know if I was going to be involved at all or not. Usually when you change editors, they wipe the slate clean and get rid of all the creators from before. Everybody gets their share of blame when books get canceled. So I was just curious as to what he was going to do. And he said, well, they were going to do a kinder, gentler Punisher. And I said, well, what form will that take? And he said, well, Frank's going to maim people rather than kill them. And I said, I don't see how that's kinder or gentler to leave someone with life-altering injuries. And I said, it also makes Frank a sadist, which he never was. He's never portrayed as a guy who cruel for cruelty's sake. Frank's very expedient. He's an executioner. You run up against Frank, he kills you. So I said, that doesn't really interest me. And he says, well, you should submit something anyway, because I'm having a number of writers submit pitches for the new Punisher series. And I said, yeah, I don't really like being in horse races like that. I mean, if you wanted me to write the Punisher, you know what I can do, come to me and I'll write more Punisher stories. I said, but I'm not going to get in a beauty pageant to try out. And it wasn't that I didn't think I had to try out or I didn't have to audition. I just didn't like that kind of competition. And in my experience, it didn't always end up with the best selection of creators, because I write a lousy pitch. And, there are people that write really great pitches and really terrible scripts. They can't deliver on the whatever it is they promised in the pitch. And I write a lousy pitch and then work like the devil to make the script work. So anyway, that's where it stood for a few months. And then one day I get a call from Mr. Cooper, and he said, you never handed in a pitch. I said, well, I told you I wasn't going to hand it. I told you when you explain your process to me, I would not be competing. And he said, but if you don't write it, Lee Weeks won't draw it. So apparently he had promised Lee Weeks the Punisher with me as writer, and that was Lee's condition. If it's anybody other than Chuck, I'm not interested. And I said, well, I'm still not interested in competing. Even though it was heavily implied the job was mine if I wanted it. I just didn't like the way that he handled the situation, and didn't feel like I could work under those conditions. And I hated the idea of a kinder, gentler Frank Castle. And so it went to, the book eventually went to John Ostrander and Tom Lyle. I was friends with both. I'm still friends with John. Tom, unfortunately, has passed away. I was very good friends with Tom. But I told them this myself, that you guys are the worst choice imaginable for the Punisher, because they were, kind of liberal Democrat kind of guys. And Frank can't be written by writers like that. They don't get Frank. They don't understand Frank. And so, that effort failed. And then I think we ended up with like Ghostbuster Punisher and a couple of others. And then eventually they gave it over to Garth Ennis, who revitalized the character, once again. But just one of the many, many, many missteps that Marvel has taken with the Punisher, a character that I don't think they like at all, and they simply don't understand. Ofe, I am a good artist on paper, been practicing and working on drawing on a computer. Going okay, but it's another feel and rhythm that gets frustrating at times. My question is, do some of the pros in the industry still work with pencils, pen, and paper, and then scan into the computer and go over it, edit it in color? I know a lot of new artists pretty much draw and do it all on the computer now. I guess what I'm really asking is some insight on the technical process of the art, from the artist on paper to the comic back in the day. And does your buddy Graham do his work on computer now? I played around a little bit with a tablet when I was back on CrossGen, and I kind of liked the experience, but I'm not that great an artist. It seemed kind of fun to me to play around with. And I was really astonished at how much control you had over thickness and thinness of line, things like that, how it could really imitate an inked line or a pencil line, everything perfectly. But like I said, I'm no artist. I do my little doodles, and that's about it. I've often stated in videos before this, my one regret was not staying in art school and becoming a better cartoonist, because it would have made me a double threat. It would have given me another tool for my toolbox. But I didn't concentrate on the writing thing because it didn't take as much discipline or patience or time. Just think stuff up, and other people draw it. So, Graham no longer works on paper. This obviously was done on paper. He does everything on a tablet, does everything digitally. Of course, all coloring is done digitally now. It has been done that way for getting close to 30 years now with computer coloring. And it's not... what amazes me, I have a lot of friends, Sergio Cariello, Graham, probably other friends who work strictly on tablet, and I don't even know that they're working on a tablet. But what amazes me is it preserves the hand. I mean, this looks every bit as much like something Graham would have drawn with pencil and ink. His style, he's not sacrificing anything here. So apparently the transition from paper to digital was a natural feel for him. And I've had Graham, Sergio, Cariello, and others tell me that the learning curve was pretty sharp, that a little fooling around, a few adjustments, and they felt perfectly comfortable drawing this way. And of course, it gives them an opportunity to manipulate images in a way that you can on paper, much like word processing makes it easier on a writer. These digital programs, these tablets, make it easier on the artist to make changes, and I would imagine speed the process. So also allows them to directly use reference, to bring reference items into the art and then render it directly there, instead of making transfers, which was always messy and the rest of it. The only downside for the artist and for us fans is there's no original art. But if you're creating content, you're not thinking about the aftermarket. But I mean, look at this and tell me that's not a Graham Nolan drawing it, and it's nothing on paper. No ink was involved. No pencils were harmed in the making of this artwork, and yet every little bit of it screams this is a Graham Nolan drawing. So I think that's the thing that amazes me most about it. But what do I know? I'm not an artist. WTK6069. Chuck, as you have pointed out previously, Westerns don't have to be set in the West necessarily. A popular modern example of this is Justified, which begins by adapting a classic Elmore Leonard story in the pilot, and then takes off from there for 7 seasons. What did you think of Justified? Also, are there many novels and movies sold as crime stories or really Westerns in disguise? To continue the previous example, it seems like Elmore Leonard really didn't change much in his writing when he switched genres from Westerns to crime, other than he no longer felt the need to have the stereotypical Western settings and other trappings. Now, the truth of the matter is that Elmore Leonard stopped writing Westerns because they just weren't selling as much as crime stories. And he switched over, but he really didn't change anything about his writing or his storytelling style or his approach to dialogue or plot or the rest of it. Leonard was really good at the high concept plot, and his stories are, for the most part, Westerns. They generally lead to an action-packed climax of some kind. But, in his crime stories, there's a bit more humor, a bit more wit than in his Western stories, all of which are excellent. Everything, his Westerns are terrific, his crime stories are terrific. And Justified is probably the best Leonard adaptation outside of the Get Shorty movie. The producers of the show really understood Leonard in a way that a lot of other movie adaptations of his work did not. Other than the times Leonard wrote the screenplays himself. But the dialogue characterization, the fact that in an Elmore Leonard story, no matter how bad things get, the lead character will come out on top in the end. And I have no problem with that. He doesn't write downer endings, and that's cool because he's writing pure escapist fiction. I remember my wife, who wasn't very familiar with Elmore Leonard, we were watching the Justified series, and she would become really worried that this character or that character would die before the series was over. And I said, no, it's a Elmore Leonard story. They're not going to die. He doesn't write stories that make you feel bad at the end. But he's sure going to make you worry about them. And that's a talent. That is a talent that even myself, I'd get a little tense, because there's that time Raylan got, it looked like they were going to take his kidneys out. They were pretty serious about it. And I thought, well, how the hell is he going to get out of this one? But he did, and even knowing what I knew about Leonard's writing, I was still worried about the character. So, and then, I mean, basically, I've explained this over and over again, that the Western is a story that creates conflict between characters, between man and nature, between man and man, between man and himself, whatever. But in the end, it's all got to end in a shootout, which pretty much makes it similar to almost every action film, every crime film made in the United States anyway. Scarface is a Western, Gangster movies, the classic American gangster movie is pretty much a Western, but it's always a plot about the evolving character, a character getting more and more tainted by his actions, more and more divorced from the people he loves, more unredeemable as the movie goes on. I mean, this goes back to the very beginning with movies starring James Cagney and Edward G. Robinson and Humphrey Bogart, and Scarface is in that mold. I mean, the Godfather movies are in that mold. Michael Corleone, moves more and more over the course of the three films into the arms of the devil. And the only possible ending for stories like that is violence. So yeah, I mean, the Western is a sturdy formula for that, even if people aren't interested in watching, sagebrush sagas, even if they don't realize it, they are watching stories built around the Western template. Walt Kevin, I've always loved lighthearted, footloose, and fancy-free adventure comics like Terry and the Pirates or Uncle Scrooge, and have started to seek out this type of story in European comics form. I've enjoyed Tintin, Spirou, and Buck Danny classics, but love the Theodore Poussin albums put out by Europe Comics so much that I've started to learn French. You seem very well versed in French comics, so I was wondering if you had any suggestions about good, lighthearted fare. I really like the series The Blue Coats, and Cinebooks is reprinting them. Not quickly enough for my taste. I've actually bought a couple of French albums that occur much later in the series because the art was so attractive. There's a terrific compilation of like Blue Coats short stories. It's an anthology book by a whole bunch of different European artists. It's really cool to look at. And the thing I like about when they reboot or play around, well, let me talk about that in a minute. Spirou, I love, and I have bought a bunch of French Spirou albums. They're doing the problem with Cinebooks is we're getting to look at books that are around in like the 70s and 80s, and Spirou continues on publishing. And I started to see some stuff, Spirou books that occurred more recently, and as much as I love the original stuff, these books were just staggering, particularly artwork by an artist named Olivier Schwartz, who's simply doing terrific work. He did a couple of Spirou albums set in the 1940s with some like mystical elements. You look at it, I mean, the artwork's absolutely gorgeous. And then another series, I think, of 3 oversized hardcovers deeply delve into Spirou and Fantasio's adventures in occupied France. And the beauty of it is they'll go back and reimagine these characters, but they don't change anything. They don't alter them in any way. They don't make them downbeat, or they don't deconstruct the character the way that comic book writers here in the United States can't seem to resist taking these established iconic characters and tearing them down to create new stories. I think simply because they don't have the imagination or desire or drive to explore those characters within the previous established framework. So they break the framework, they break the rules, and they change everything. Well, European comics don't do that. And they'll take a beloved character and enhance the character. They don't change anything about the character. They don't make it more quote unquote adult. They don't add any material in there that wasn't already intended by the creators, but they just build on that world, and they try to make, richer, more compelling stories, but without breaking anything. And like I say, Olivier Schwartz, look for this guy's stuff. He has a new series that's been running called Atom Agency that I really like. It's a detective, lighthearted fare, like you said, detective agency set in post-war France. And I don't know, look at that, man. The guy's just a terrific cartoonist, and he's a terrific storyteller. And Atom Agency is a whole lot of fun. Another great example of rebooting a character without altering them is the new series of Lucky Luke graphic novels, which are appearing from Cinebook in English. And these take Lucky Luke, which is always a very broad parody, Western parody, and they sort of make them somewhat more realistic, somewhat closer to actual Westerns than a satire on a Western. And in doing so, lose none of the charm of the original graphic novels. Lucky Luke is still undefeatably fast gunman. He still, stands on the moral high ground. The stories still have somewhat of a light comedic feel, but they're set up and formatted and paced just like Universal Westerns from the 1950s. Like a Jimmy Stewart or an Audie Murphy Western. And in France, those Universal International Westerns made in the 50s are hugely popular. If you want to watch, Howard Duff or Rod Cameron, Westerns from the 50s made by Universal International, they're simply not available here. You have to get them from France. And I think the entire Universal International Western catalog is available in France, not dubbed. So if you're of a mind, but like I said, in Europe they tend to revere these characters more and are loath to alter them in any way to lose any of the original, feeling of each series. And I wish we did more of that here. I would like to see these kinds of approaches to, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, other characters that we know and love here. Okay, Dan Perrin, 3459. I thought you had a fantastic handle on the GCPD characters, Montoya, Bullock, Gordon, and the Sheriff's Department of Shotgun and Sissy. We know an incredibly successful series, a personal favorite. Gotham Central owes a lot to what you built. My question is, did you ever pitch a GCPD-centered book? Now, I did a couple of, miniseries. I did Gordon's Law, and I did a GCPD series. I was already writing 4 monthlies for DC. I never really thought of a cop monthly. And generally, Gordon's Law is very much a James Ellroy kind of story, where Gordon is facing, massive corruption within the police department, and it's very noirish and hard-boiled crime stuff. And Klaus Janson with me on the art, fantastic stuff. And I had a lot of fun. I love police procedural stories. I love writing about cops, and this let me stretch those muscles a little bit. GCPD, on the other hand, was more of a 87th Precinct kind of story. And if you're fans of 87th Precinct and you've read my work, there's a lot of nods to Ed McBain in my police stuff. When I would have, the 2 homicide cops with the alliterative names. It was Monahan and Morgan, I think. Was a nod to those same 2, my version of those same 2 characters that would show up in the Ed McBain novels. The disinterested homicide cops who make all of the, darkly humorous jokes, the gallows humor jokes about the deceased. But on this one, once again, I had a terrific art team. I had Rodolfo DiMaggio on the covers with Bill Sienkiewicz inking, and then in the interiors, Jim Aparo with Bill Sienkiewicz inking. So boy, I was in good shape. I was in hog heaven writing these things. But like I say, these were very much police procedural mystery stories, in which Batman only appears briefly in the background. We're aware that Batman is there, but it's all about the cops and heist elements and mystery elements, all that stuff I really dig. But yeah, I never really thought about a monthly because it would have been heavy lifting, especially since I had 4 other titles I was writing at the same time. Jackie Wolf, hope this question has more success than my last ones. Were your last questions unsuccessful? I'm sorry. Your favorite crossover comics, including licensed character crossovers not written by you. Well, I love a crossover. I love to write them. I love to read them. I think they could be what brings new readers back to comics. Some really imaginatively conceived crossovers could work wonders on increasing circulations for both these companies. And that's exactly what the first big intercompany crossover did. At the time that Superman, Spider-Man Treasury Edition, those honking big comics, came out, both Marvel and DC were in financial trouble. DC more so than Marvel. Comic sales were way down. Marvel was doing what it could with Plateau Publishing, which is something Stan Lee never gets enough credit for. Stan Lee bringing Marvel through the 70s by doing those cheaper to produce black and white magazines like Savage Sword and Vampire Tales and things like that, which really kept Marvel's doors open. Now, DC was in a lot more trouble, having to lay off 40% of their staff, sending a lot of their freelancers home without work. But both companies needed this shot in the arm. And this is something that we all need to go back and look at this crossover. Now, it's an obvious grab for the money, grab for circulation, everything else, but publishing is a business. You got people you're responsible to, and you got to keep the doors open. You got to keep the presses running. And the thing is that the challenge, or the opportunity, I should say, that the Superman Spider-Man crossover presented to the publishers was taken very seriously by both publishing houses. They understood this was a one-time shot to bring in a lot of new readers, or possibly bring readers back who had stopped reading comics. Just out of curiosity, what's going to happen when Superman meets Spider-Man? And they made it a Treasury edition, which was impossible to miss on the newsstand, sold at a higher price point, so they were going to get as much money out of it as possible. Also, newsstand owners liked that higher price point because here's a book that makes the space it takes up worthwhile, because it costs enough that the newsstand's going to make some money off of it too. So everybody was happy. But the key thing here, and the thing that we've lost, these comic book companies have lost over the decades, is that they put extra effort into this book. I have no idea what size the originals were drawn at, but I suspect they were drawn 2 up. They're drawn in a wider format for the Treasury editions, and the artwork is stunning. I really hope Ross Andrew and the rest of the people working on this got paid a higher page rate, because they put a lot of work into this. I mean, this is a absolutely gorgeous comic, and it reads well. It's a fun story. It brings out the likable elements, the appeal of both characters perfectly. Superman and Spider-Man are on stage an equal amount of time. They're given an equal amount of exposure. It's a really fun story. Like I said, the artwork for this is fabulous. A level of draftsmanship and everything else, and attention to detail we had never seen in American comic books up to this point. And that's the thing that I wish companies would understand today, is they'll come up with a gimmick and then not take it earnestly enough, not take it seriously enough to actually make a quality product, to put their entire effort behind making this product a standout, a milestone to attract new readers. The idea of quality doesn't seem to exist anymore. Now, moving on to other crossovers, any Judge Dredd crossover written by Alan Grant, I love. You know, Dredd Batman, Dredd Predator, Dredd Aliens, Dredd Aliens and Predator, whatever. But this one, the first Dredd Predator, is my favorite. Alan on script, and my buddy Quique Alcatena killing it on the art. I worked with Quique once on a Predator story myself. Absolutely perfect artist for anything Predator, as well as Judge Dredd. And now another one I liked was the Simpson and Futurama crossover Crisis. It's this big epic that they collected in a huge hardcover edition, and it's a lot of fun. Bill Morrison and the guys created a really cool crossover here. But for me, the greatest comic book crossover ever was Dan Jurgens' Superman Aliens. This is just a marvelous story and beautifully drawn. Dan Jurgens as inked by Kevin Nolan. It's a terrific alien story. It's a terrific Superman story. There's a lot of edge, a lot of heart, a lot of suspense. There's everything you would want in a crossover. And he really, Dan pays a lot of attention, obviously, to Superman. He's an expert. He is the go-to guy for everything Superman, in my opinion. And he pays a lot of attention to the aliens, mythos as well. And just a hell of a story. I didn't write a real sequel to this. They came to me and said they wanted me to do a sequel to it. And I said, I couldn't touch this property with a 10-foot pole. I would not want to do anything at all to taint what Dan's done already. So I said, now I'll do a Superman Aliens if you let me loose in Kirby's Fourth World. If my miniseries is completely different from Dan's, I'll do it. And they agreed and gave me John Bogdanov and Kevin Nolan. So I was in heaven. Once again, luckiest man in the world working with these awesome artists. But I was not about to go anywhere near what Dan had done. I thought it was untouchable. I thought it was perfect as it was. And it didn't need me muffing a follow-up, which I really think I would have. I would not have created a worthy sequel. So I opted to do something entirely different. Hassan Pashal, you mentioned that you're a fan of martial arts movies. I was wondering, can you give me any recommendation, and who's your favorite martial artist? Okay, first up is Burning Paradise. It's also called The Rape of the Red Lotus Temple, which might give you an idea of how intense this movie is. It's Hong Kong director Ringo Lam's only martial arts epic. He was usually made cop dramas and fireman dramas, urban modern day thrillers. But this one, he goes back to medieval China for this really dark martial arts movie with a great deal of horror elements. But Lam wanted straight up martial arts. He didn't want any wire work, which was becoming really popular in Hong Kong in the 80s. He didn't want any phony baloney stuff. So all the fighting in this is, just stuntmen for real, fighting on the ground. The leaping and jumping around is all their own. And they set up, it's basically, two mythical Chinese martial arts heroes are imprisoned in the Red Lotus Temple. They're enslaved, and it's just a horrible place. And they've got to fight their way out of it. They've got to lead a slave revolt to get out of this place. And the fights in these really these dismal passageways and on these like wooden bridges over fiery pits and things like that. Just great setup for a martial arts epic. Burning Paradise, if you ever get a chance to see it. Okay, Jackie Chan, you can't get away from Jackie Chan. I'm going to recommend First Strike. It's not one of his best movies, but has some of his best fights. Chief among these is the one I often reference in these videos, the ladder fight. Jackie's only weapon, he's completely outnumbered. His only weapon is this aluminum folding ladder, which he uses to, with extraordinary success. It's a tremendous display of athletic prowess, balance, martial arts, chutzpah. And it's also a funny scene because, as you can imagine, wielding a folding aluminum ladder, you're going to get your fingers pinched every now and again. And Jackie pulls that off perfectly. One of my favorite Chan movies, he's teamed with Michelle Yeoh in Super Cop 3. He's playing, his usual cop character, this time undercover, to get involved in a drug ring centered in the Golden Triangle in Southeast Asia. And this movie is nuts. The martial arts are terrific. The action set pieces are fantastic. The final battle aboard a speeding train is involving a crashing helicopter. It's just unfreaking forgettable. Chan is just a master showman as well as a master martial artist. Another Chan favorite of mine is Thunderbolt. It's set in Japan. Jackie's a race car driver getting ready for the big race in Japan. And there's some fantastic sequences. One in which he's in a cargo container converted to an office, and it gets lifted above the ground by a crane, and Jackie's trapped inside, being thrown around. I don't know how this guy survived any of the movies he made, in particular this one. And then Thunderbolt is very, very famous amongst martial arts people for its absolutely epic fight in this huge pachinko parlor in Japan, where once again Jackie is outnumbered and has to fight off about a bajillion guys in this pachinko parlor, which just seems to, the parlor goes on and on forever. It's just with hundreds and hundreds of machines, with guys trying to, basically bat Jackie's brains out, but he's not about to let them do it. So Thunderbolt's a big favorite, but any Jackie Chan movie, especially made during this era in the 80s, early 90s, is worth a look. Donnie Yen is probably currently my favorite martial artist. He's martial arts actor, and he's a very good actor as well. If you get a chance to see the Ip Man series, Ip Man is based on the life. I think there's 4 films based on the life of the martial arts master who trained Bruce Lee. And it tells his story through Japanese occupation of China in World War II and all the rest of it. And these are good, epic, again, no wire work. Everything's in the camera. There's no special effects. And Yen is just, man, the guy's fast. I mean, the stuff he can do is incredible. And even as he's getting older, he's been around in the martial arts scene for a while. Even as he's getting older, he's just this display of athleticism. And he's just a cool dude. He's got like the Steve McQueen vibe in any role he plays. And but immensely likable character in all of these things. I recently rewatched the In Line of Duty movies. There's 4 of them. This is the first of them. It's called Yes, Madam. And it teams Michelle Yeoh and Cynthia Rothrock in just a ball-busting girl action film. Hong Kong, they make like the best girl fight movies in the world. And this one does not disappoint. Michelle and Cynthia Rothrock are cops out to bring down a really, really nasty gang of Hong Kong hoods. Like I said, this is the first of the In the Line of Duty movies. The series went on. Cynthia Khan would eventually be the lead in them, and they are all uniformly excellent. Particularly the third one, In the Line of Duty 3, is a really tough crime film as well as an excellent martial arts movie. Now, Stephen Chow, Kung Fu Hustle. This is a funny movie, but it's also a fantastic period kung fu epic set in 1920s Peking, and funny, outrageous, often approaching, like almost a Looney Tunes sort of vibe. But it's a great suspenseful story. It's very funny, and it's there's a lot at stake, and it's just an all around awesome flick. If you ever get a chance, Stephen Chow has made some amazing kung fu movies, always breaking formula, always leaning more toward humor than or equal amounts of humor, along with the choppy sake action. A personal favorite of mine, not as well known, The Outlaw Brothers. It's a 80s Hong Kong flick about a bunch of guys stealing cars, with some absolutely amazing fights throughout that you got to wonder how many people got sent to the hospital after some of the stunt work. Because, Hong Kong, particularly in the 70s and 80s, not necessarily that well known for taking safety precautions. That's why so many Jackie Chan movies end with outtakes of him, being loaded into an ambulance. And that's pretty much the case in all of these films made in this period. The one movie I'm going to recommend not made in Hong Kong is a film called Chocolate. It's a Thai movie. It's a girl fight movie. It's got a really terrific lead character. She's autistic, but she's called upon to basically avenge her family from a bunch of really nasty bastards. And it's amazing action. And bloody. This is a bloody one, but one of my favorites. And I've pretty much touched on, empty hand fighting movies for the most part. I didn't get into samurai and the rest of it. I'm a huge samurai movie fan as well. But, if you like martial arts movies, any of the ones I recommended, you will not be disappointed. Hey, if you want to reach me with questions, suggestions, pictures of your doggies and kitties, send them to brunobookstore@gmail.com, brunobookstore@gmail.com. It's the most reliable way to reach me. And while I got you, my second Conan novel should be announced very soon. I just saw illustrations for the third novel. So these editions will now have illustrations. If you've ordered this book recently, when it comes, it will have illos by Adamir Leal, all really, really cool looking, old school book illustrations. And the book's selling well. Everybody seems to like it. I'm getting a lot of very kind words from everyone on it. And you might want to check it out if you are a Conan aficionado. So that's it for me this week. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Please hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. And I'm going to see all